Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a technical meeting held by the authority today, Wednesday, September 24th, 2025, in docket number 250214, which is Pura's docket, in which we are conducting our successor study for the renewable energy tariff programs as required by the General Assembly. My name is Patrick Fryer. I'm one of the legal advisors assigned to this docket. Today is our second technical meeting in this matter. We have an agenda in front of us today. If this is your first time participating in a Pura proceeding, I just ask that you listen closely to a few housekeeping notes before we begin here. We are live streaming the proceeding on our YouTube channel. We also have a court reporter with us to transcribe the proceedings. As such, if you have a question or comment throughout the proceeding, we ask that you make sure you are identifiable by name and affiliation, as we will record that in the transcript. Additionally, the chat feature is not part of the official record, so we ask that you refrain from using that unless it's just a purely technical audiovisual need or something like that. But any comments or questions need to be vocalized for our record. We have a couple of presentations today. We also have time for public comment. If you would like to be recognized during the proceeding for questions or comment, we ask that you locate the raised hand function under the React tab at the bottom of the screen. After each presentation, we'll open it up for question and answer, beginning with Pura staff. So with that, I think we can get into the agenda. The first presentation today is it's a joint presentation between Eversource Energy and United Illuminated Company. So it asks that if Mr. Bumpin, if you could get that slide deck ready for the presentation, and then I will turn it over to the representatives of those companies.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Attorney Fryer. I'm Brian Rice, Director of Customer Solar Programs for Eversource. And then I'm joined by Katarina Miller from UI, Manager of Electric Supply. We will be going through the EDC's presentation this morning on the notice topics. Next slide, please. So we will cover the items that were included in the notice of request for comments, which the EDC is jointly commented on as well. Which include tariff economics, residential underserved customer program design, non-residential paired storage, and lastly, community solar, after which point we'll be happy to take any questions. Next slide, please. So for tariff economics, I won't spend a whole lot of time on this because Eversource provided comments on analysis on different tariff designs in the first technical meeting and previous written comments, but I'll largely just take the opportunity to point out that the EDCs included some of that analysis with its second round of comments. It attached an Excel workbook so that Pura staff and other stakeholders may have the benefit of seeing that analysis. And what it helped to do was demonstrate how end-use customers
the freak
could still realize additional, excuse me, I was distracted by somebody not on mute. It demonstrated that end-use customers would still have the opportunity to achieve significant bill reductions under various tariff designs that did not provide full retail credit for excess generation. And a representative residential customer could still save in the range of $1,500 to $2,500 per year under some of the alternative scenarios that were presented in that analysis. The other thing that we previously commented on and reiterate is that differentiating compensation for power exported to the grid from retail rates would provide meaningful incentive for customers to include energy storage to manage when they're discharging power and aligning it with their consumption. And that would provide a meaningful incentive through an otherwise scalar rate, and could begin to encourage greater rates of storage attachment before more complex time of use rates were rolled out by the EDCs, which is also something that a number of stakeholders have looked to as a means to encourage storage. But I think what we would want to stress is that you don't need time of use rates in the near term to meaningfully create more incentives for customers to add storage. You can do that simply by differentiating the value provided for power that's put out to the grid. The last item that we'll take the opportunity to recommend with respect to tariff economics is that the focus on tariffs should remain on generation facilities that are situated at customers' premises and size so as not to exceed the load of the customer. And those are requirements that are expressly included in 16244Z. And we think that's an important feature for any successor program. If tariff designs kind of veered more into being just rates for power that's supplied to the grid, the EDCs would have larger kind of cost concerns with that, since it's not bound by customers' usage and the amount of a customer bill that's available to be reduced. And companies would favor competitive mechanisms to select those projects and/or really tie in the compensation provided to projects that are providing grid power to wholesale avoided cost values. Thank you. Next slide. We very much appreciate Pira's prompts on residential underserved program design. We think it's an important issue to make sure that successor programs are being as accessible as possible to all customers. And I think what we tried to provide clear and detailed comments on a somewhat complicated issue within our written comments, and we'll attempt to do so again today. I think what we wanted to reiterate is that under current netting tariffs, all customers are treated equally, pretty equally. All customers, whether they're on a discount rate or not, are reducing their billed usage through on-site generation and through excess generation within a billing period that offsets billed usage. And then all customers are, again, whether they're on a discounted rate or not, receive credit for any excess generation at the full retail rate. And to illustrate this, I've going to provide some copies of a representative bill. This is an Eversource bill, both the meter box and then the summary of charges for a customer that is both enrolled in RRES and participating in a low-income discount rate. So in this particular scenario, the customer has a net excess kilowatt hour usage of 344 kilowatt hours. So as a result, they're incurred 0 kilowatt charges for their usage because it's fully offset. And they are receiving credit at the full retail rate, which for this billing period was 27.7 cents, and receiving a $95 bill credit that is used to offset the discounted customer charge, which is a 50% discount, and then any future charges that the customer incurs in future cycles. The remaining $90.63 credit will be eligible to offset. Now, if this customer did have charges or did have usage, the way the low-income discount rate would be applied on their bill is similar to how it's applied here for just the customer charge. So the customer charge and any kilowatt hour charges are first calculated at the full retail rate, and then a single discount amount is applied by multiplying the sum total of those charges by the low-income discount rate. In this case, it's $9.62 times 50%. But if there are kilowatt hour charges, that would be a larger amount. So it's important to note that in those scenarios where a low income or a customer on a LIDR does not offset their full usage with on-site generation, they're still retaining the benefit of the discount on that remaining on charges for that remaining usage. And when we conclude, I'm happy to come back to this and answer any questions to kind of understand how billing works and how the programs interact. But the other thing we want to reiterate is that there are a lot of options that Pura has developed with EDC and stakeholder input that are designed to help vulnerable customers manage their energy bills and address affordability. There's RRES and now a discount rate. We also have the matching payment program that provides arrearage forgiveness to customers that are behind. We have home energy solutions for income eligible customers, which provides no cost energy efficiency services. And then we also have the Shared Clean Energy Facility Program, which prioritizes this customer group for receipt of bill credits from SCEF projects. So recognizing that there are a lot of ways and a lot of options available to customers to improve their energy affordability, the EDCs think it's important to recognize that participation in RRES or Successor program and installation of on-site renewable generation may not always be the best option for all customers. It's going to depend on their individual circumstances. And just to be clear, if a customer has reduced their energy bill through energy efficiency services that were provided to them at no cost, if they're able to consistently pay their bill without distress because it's discounted, and they're working off a past due balance through the matching payment program at the same time, again, without economic distress, the EDCs are pleased with that outcome for that customer. And I think we would encourage Pura and other stakeholders to recognize that maybe that's the type of scenario in which adding a financial commitment and maybe a lease with a third-party company may not be a huge incremental improvement for that customer. And that's okay. All right. We'll be happy to talk about this topic in the question and answer period because it is an important one. Next slide, which I think Ms. Miller will take over now.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the authority for the opportunity to speak at the technical meeting. My name is Katarina Miller. I'm a manager for electric supply, and so let's talk about how non-residential paired storage can deliver value to both the customers and grid. From the ratepayer's perspective, paired storage offers performance-based value. It helps reduce peak demand and supports grid reliability. So we have already several programs and strategies in place, as you can see on the slide. We have energy storage solution, non-virus alternatives, flexible interconnection, and other programs that are well positioned to support these resources. The EDCs recommend enabling dual participation of paired resources across these programs. This ensures that we are maximizing the value without creating artificial incentives. We also caution against compensation rate adders, as you can see on the slide, that may be inefficient or distort cost balance. It also can unintentionally shift cost to not participating customers. So the goal is to support storage in a fair way for our customers and for everyone that is participating in a program, have an efficient and aligned with broader clean energy strategies. Next slide, please. Community solar is a powerful tool. for expanding access to clean energy, especially for customers who can install solar on site, whether it's for financial reason, for limited sun rays due to shade, or any other aspects that prohibits them to install solar panels. Ratepayers benefits, I mean, we do have currently programs like SCEF and RS for multi-family affordable housing and virtual net metering that are currently in place. And those programs are helping underserved customers that reduce their energy cost and participate in a clean energy transition. These programs are designed to advance public interest goals, but also equity, affordability, and sustainability for those customers. From the EDC standpoint, these programs are working really well. They have been well implemented. They're transparent, cost-effective, and targeted to those who need them the most, which are customers that are less able to take advantage of other clean energy options and advance public interest goals. What are our recommendations? The EDCs recommend to continue to grow these successful programs. Again, these have been implemented. The approach allows us to reach more customers while maintaining balanced cost structure. This program has been already implemented, and for instance, for SCEF program, just as an example, should not require any additional cost for implementation unless there are any changes in the program, but that implementation has already been completed. And again, community solar is not just about clean energy. It is about inclusive energy access. It is the commitment supporting its continued expansion, but it's also, again, for customers that are participating and receiving the benefits of those programs. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation, and we can open the floor to any questions that you may have to the EDCs.
Thank you very much for the EDCs for that presentation. I'll now turn it over to Authority staff for questions. I believe Molly Charles would be the first one up with questions.
Thank you, Attorney Fryer, and thank you to both EDCs for your time and presentation today. I will start from the beginning of the slideshow with my questions. If you wouldn't mind turning to slide 3. So could you just confirm that the EDC's analysis of bill savings under different tariff options considered only solar systems and not paired solar and storage? And thank you for filing that analysis.
That's correct. The analysis included a representative profile of PV generation without the addition of any storage.
Thank you. Would the EDCs be able to possibly supplement that analysis and include a look at bill savings with paired solar and storage?
We could. We'll have to make some assumptions about the operation of a paired storage facility, but we can do that, and we'll identify what those assumptions are.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess a similar question, I think the written comments had mentioned that it didn't include any consideration of installed costs and rate of return. Is that something that the EDCs would also be able to provide?
That we're less able to provide, but a recommendation I would provide is to utilize the residential tariff model for the current RS program. And, PURA could potentially, solicit input on cost assumptions or modeling assumptions that maybe should be revised to that. But the EDCs don't really have, any special knowledge on the typical costs of PV systems or how to represent, how they'd be financed and how that would impact tariff economics.
Okay, thank you. And then just a clarification on the last point here is, and apologies if I missed this, but is the recommendation that tariffs for supplying power to the grid would be competitively bid Would that apply just to non-residential, or are the EDCs recommending that for residential as well?
I think we would certainly recommend it for non-residential, for any tariff in which there wasn't kind of that constraint of the energy is to be used at a customer's premises and not exceed its load. And I think we would just recommend that those targets remain in place for a residential successor program. Again, our view is that if you're providing a tariff that provides retail value, or some portion of retail value for energy, it should really be intended to be a mechanism for customers to reduce their bill. And we talk about this in comments. Allowing a customer to utilize distributed generation to reduce their bill, in our view, is different from expanding that to a customer can reduce their bill and also now, generate additional income for themselves, which is ultimately, being supported by non-participating customers. So I guess to put it succinctly, we think successor programs should continue to primarily be an option for customers to manage their energy costs and their own energy bills, not an opportunity to generate new types of income for individuals or businesses that is ultimately paid for by non-participants.
Thank you. And then just to follow up on the competitively bid recommendation, switching gears a little bit to specifically non-residential, there were comments, I believe, from the Clean Coalition that recommended the use of market responsive pricing to set compensation rates on an ongoing basis, where rates would be adjusted based on application volumes. And I'm just wondering if the EDCs have any comment on to what extent that could approach or could address concerns around ensuring that total program costs remain reasonable.
Eversource doesn't have any specific comments. I mean, I think it comes down to what's the compensation setting mechanism. If you have a design that says we're going to increase compensation if we don't get so many megawatts in a year, okay, but you still have to decide how much is compensation going to increase, and what's a reasonable level of compensation increase, what's the target, and the decisions around those questions are going to have implications for total costs, and potentially introducing risks of increasing costs in a way that sacrifices the balance between participants and non-participants. And that contrasts with running a competitive solicitation that provides pretty transparent confidence that the costs paid for resources are as low as the market can provide, and that non-participants aren't being asked to bear any more costs than are absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Does UI have anything to add to that?
No, I would have to agree with Mr. Rice. Similarly, again, there's no specific recommendation. However, we want to ensure that the compensation reflects the actual value of energy, and that it's transparent approach to setting price within the Renewable Energy Tariff Program. We do have currently in place the process for competitive solicitation and for the price setting in the programs that we currently administer. And again, we also need to keep in mind to protect non-participating customers and while maintaining the program affordability or sustainability of the program. So I agree with everything that Mr. Ray said prior.
Thank you. If we could turn to slide 4, please. So I just wanted to follow up a little bit more on the recommendation that these various clean energy and affordability programs sort of be considered holistically. So do the EDCs have any specific recommendations for how those projects should be prioritized, otherwise considered together, in order to most effectively benefit low-income customers?
I mean, I don't think the EDCs would recommend getting in a position of, kind of telling customers which ones they should pursue first. I think the options should be made available to customers. They should be provided information to understand them as best they're able. And then, we should allow kind of customers to make their own decisions. At the same time, when you look at kind of the commitments and risks involved in these programs, they are different. So a customer can enroll in LIDR. It doesn't cost, they can through a phone call, and providing necessary documentation. They don't have to pay anything to enroll. They don't have to commit to staying on a fixed rate for so many years. Same thing with SCEF. It's a no cost credit that they're actually, many are auto enrolled into on an opt out design. Same thing with MPP. They got to pay their bill. But if they're consistently paying the bill, then they're getting the benefit of arrearage forgiveness. And then lastly, HESI is providing substantially no cost energy efficiency services. RES is actually an outlier among these, in that in order for a customer to realize the benefits, they may, I mean, I know there are different ways that can be structured, but in many cases, they're incurring making a financial commitment. They're potentially signing a long-term lease or PPA, or they're acquiring a system through a purchase or another financing arrangement. So the RES is kind of an outlier here. So there could be a reasonable argument to be made that other programs that don't present financial risk to the customer should be prioritized. But we're also content to offer make options available to customers and provide them choice and allow them to make their own decisions.
And to expand on that, UI agrees with the statement as well. Each program design and suitability for its suitability for different customers and customer segment. And I believe that EDCs provide a great amount of information on their respective websites and are open for any questions about the programs. But I would agree that EDC should not recommend one program over another, because it really depends on the needs of the customer or the project itself.
Thank you. I appreciate those responses. My next questions are on the next slide, slide 5. So could the EDCs just elaborate a little bit more on each of the bullet points here? Specifically, what types of storage are eligible to participate in each of these programs or strategies, and what performance-based value storage can receive through them? I guess I'm curious if the EDCs see any gaps in these offerings, where certain types of storage might not have an avenue to participate currently.
Sure. I can go first, and then Ms. Miller can add. So, I mean, energy storage solutions, I think it was noted in the notice for comments, that program is eligible to behind the meter resources, but both residential and commercial. And then as for the other ones, I mean, they're not programs that you can say, oh, it's this type of resources gets this many dollars per megawatt. But I think that's probably a good thing. I think the point that we're trying to make is that there are a lot of different ways that value can be realized from energy storage resources. And I think, and I'll fully acknowledge that here are the EDCs and stakeholders are still figuring out kind of how to best utilize storage resources. And I think they're doing that through all these programs and options. Non-wire solutions, again, it's an important initiative. It's still in its early stages, but that's absolutely an avenue for storage resources to be utilized to meet a grid need, where identified and where it's determined it can do so cost effectively. Flexible interconnection, for staff and other folks that aren't entirely familiar with what we referred to. This is a strategy that I think is increasingly being recognized as a means to reduce the costs of system upgrades that would otherwise be required to interconnect a PV system. Simplest example is if a standalone 5 megawatt PV system that applies to interconnect, the EDC would have to assume that it could be discharging that maximum 5 megawatts out to the grid at any time and determine what upgrades are required to accommodate that maximum export. But that same system, if paired with storage, could conceivably limit that maximum export. You could say, I have a 5 megawatt PV system, but I'm going to pair it with storage and operate that storage such that I'll never export to the grid more than 3 megawatts. If that's firm, and there are commitments and controls to make sure that the maximum delivery of the grid never exceeds 3 megawatts, the EDC could potentially account for that in determining what upgrades are required, and the cost of required upgrades could be substantially lower. And that's all very transparent real value that would be created by the addition of storage. Similarly, there are there may be opportunities for storage to participate in wholesale markets. I think that's an area where project owners are still trying to figure out what strategies work. But to support those strategies, Connecticut has rolled out a wholesale distribution access tariff, WAT. And lastly, there are rate structures that can provide incentive for storage. Right off the bat, a commercial customer on demand rate could utilize storage to manage their peak demand and impact their demand charges. And then gradually, as more complex time of use rates are rolled out, that can provide additional value. And I think that the point that we want to make is these are all different solutions that are really trying to provide performance-based value for storage. Trying to encourage storage to be utilized to fill a specific purpose, meet a need, and then tying compensation very directly to the value of that impact. And we think that's a much better approach to encouraging storage adoption, maximizing its value, and achieving the best balance of costs and benefits than is alternative mechanisms that say, well, if you pair your resource with storage, we'll pay you more money. Okay, it's it's workable from a financing standpoint, but that additional compensation for a storage adder is ultimately being funded by non-participating customers, and there's no assurance that the benefits from putting storage next to a PV system are going to be commensurate with the additional costs in the way that they can be linked with these other programs.
Thank you. Does you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not really. Again, similar to my previous comment, it really depends on what the project is looking for and what is the purpose and what is the focus of the program. So they are all different programs, different focus. They also have different features when it comes to incentives. But again, these are performance-based programs, and I think that provides the greater value to the customers and to the grid's resiliency when it comes to already implemented programs.
Thank you. I guess a specific question on non-residential paired storage. So for example, if a non-residential solar project was participating under the BIAL tariff in NRES, would there be an avenue for that project to add storage? And could you clarify whether being connected front of the meter under the BIAL tariff would mean that any paired storage would also be front of the meter?
So this has kind of been addressed in the RS program, not long after it launched. So for the most part, yeah, if you have a front of the meter resource that's paired with storage, that the default is going to be that storage is going to be operating as a front of the meter resource, and that may be okay. Like a lot of these things, a lot of these value streams discussed on the slide can be realized by front of meter resources, flexible interconnection for one. What it doesn't do, on a default basis is provide backup capability. But there are kind of ways that can be accomplished, and the EDCs did approve metering configurations that were developed with stakeholder input that allow for switching capability for storage resources, that its default operation is as a front of meter resource, but in the event of an outage, a switch can be triggered that allows for that storage resource to be redirected to provide backup capability.
Thank you. That was in RES or NRES?
RS.
Thanks. So we did receive some written comments that suggested that the legislature could potentially adjust eligibility for the ESS program so that front of the meter projects could be allowed to participate. Would the EDCs have any comment on that suggestion?
Not here. I would direct that question within the ESS annual review docket, so that the staff that are kind of responsible for managing and designing that program, as well as the stakeholders that participated in it, could comment.
Okay, thank you. And then just curious on this last point, in Massachusetts or any other states that do offer adders for paired non-residential solar and storage, have the EDCs observed any negative impacts on the balance of costs between participants and non-participants there?
Yes, I mean in Massachusetts, the SMART program provides an express adder of several cents per kilowatt hour to PV resources that are paired with storage. But again, the compensation is additional compensation ultimately for the output of the PV system. And there are operational requirements for the storage resource. But when the SMART program was originally launched, like one of the operational requirements was it has to cycle 52 times per year. Okay, I mean it's an operational requirement, but I don't think it can be reliably assumed that simply cycling a storage resource 52 times per year is going to create any additional value to or certainly a direct value that accrues to non-participants who are ultimately supporting the costs of the adder.
So that was just and 52 times per year, but not specified at what times?
I mean, I think there were some times as well. I have to go back and look at the regulation, and it's changed over time. But it's been a struggle within the program design of determining eligibility criteria and operational requirements that one could be readily understood and adhered to, but also provided high confidence that they were creating additional value that accrued to the customers that were supporting the cost of the additional compensation.
Thank you. I can pause here and see if UI had anything to add to those questions.
No, we do not. Unlike with Eversource, they have experience from Massachusetts with the SMART program and energy storage. But only thing that maybe I would add from UI's perspective, again, energy storage solutions and other programs, they are performance-based program, which reward actual grid contribution. Unlike when we add adders, they might not actually reflect the actual grid value of storage dispatch.
Thank you. And then just a clarifying question on the EDC's written comments. There was a mention that there was a need to work with stakeholders to establish clear metering guidelines for projects with paired storage resources. Could you just elaborate on what specific issues you've encountered with metering for storage projects?
Sure. So the bio example in the RS program was one. There may be others. And I think that is an item that I think is appropriate to flag as a priority to be addressed in a successor program. The EDC's, recommendation is that, project owners be able to participate in all these programs, right? That they can figure out what works best for their project, and all these programs are accessible to them. And we recognize that part of doing that is making sure that metering requirements don't emerge as an unintended barrier to those. And I think that's an area where the EDCs should be working with stakeholders to make sure that we're not creating those unintended barriers to customers participating in the programs that we want them to participate in, because they're going to maximize value and benefits for the state.
Thank you. And do you have any comment on whether there's an existing stakeholder group that's working on that sort of thing, or what docket would be most appropriate to address that through?
I think starting with a working group and probably the interconnection working group that's established would be the best first place. Put it to stakeholders to work with the EDCs and get the right technical experts to figure out how the technical requirements can be aligned with the goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you. And then just one final question on this slide. So Verigy had submitted comments that suggested that paired storage could potentially receive an adder in exchange for the EDCs being granted operational control over the storage asset. So would the EDCs support this proposal or have any comments on this suggestion? And I guess specifically, would it address the issue that was brought up about ensuring that storage benefits the grid and ratepayers?
So again, I think that, to me, that's the type of solution that should be explored as part of a non-wire solution. Fully accept that there could be an opportunity for a third-party system owner to provide operational control of the EDC, such that the EDC can realize value from that resource, and that the system owner could be accordingly compensated. But I think we have a program that's gotten a lot of focus from Pura and the EDCs to do that, and it's the non-wire solutions program. So I would kind of implement those solutions there and not try to duplicate them in the design of a successor renewable program.
Thank you. Does UI have anything to add there?
No, I would agree with the same. I have no additional comments. Thank you.
Okay. Now just a few questions on the next slide, please. So seeing the reference to virtual net metering here, would the EDCs recommend any changes to the rules around virtual net metering in a potential successor program?
No, I think we reference virtual net metering just to recognize that it's a program that has supported shared solar. But we also recognize it's a capped program. And I think the shared solar has been more recently implemented through the other three channels here. And I think those would really be the pathways to continue to support shared solar.
Thank you. Is that the same for you,
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, VNM has been in place for a while, and we do not recommend any changes right now.
Okay. Moving back to community solar, the Green Bank had suggested in written comments that a potential SCEF successor program could prioritize customers enrolled in low-income discount rates and focus on renters rather than assigning credits through a lottery. So do the EDCs have any comments on this proposal or any other potential recommended adjustments to enrollment methods for SCEF?
I'll just I'll start by saying I think we already, Eversource at least already enrolls customers based on LIDR participation. Can you actually just give me a moment to kind of consult somebody offline?
Sure. Yeah. In the meantime, does UI have anything to comment on there?
I would do the same. If I can actually ask one more time to repeat the question just to make sure that I convey it in a correct way.
Sure, yeah, there was a suggestion in written comments that a potential SCEF successor program could prioritize customers on LiDAR and specifically focus on renters rather than assigning credits to customers through a lottery. So just curious if the EDCs have any comments on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in for Eversource. So the enrollment procedure that we use for the SCEF program is heavily based on participation in our low income discount rate. So that is the primary source for us to be able to identify who qualifies as a low income customer for participation in the SCEF program. And then within that enrollment process, we do have certain prioritizations, or what you could also describe as a weighted lottery to focus on customers who are in arrears, but also on the low income discount rate to ensure that we're first enrolling customers who are not only income eligible, but who are also having difficulty affording their electric bill. So that's something that we've already incorporated into our enrollment process. And we do have also within the opt-in portion of the SCEF program, an allowance for customers who are renters and cannot install solar on their own home to submit an application to participate in SCEF. But to incorporate a renter qualification within the opt-out function of the SCEF program would be difficult because that's just not data that we have currently on all of our LIDR customers. So I guess just to reiterate, any low-income customer that we enroll in SCEF is primarily based on participation in the LIDR, and the renter component is information that we don't have access to automatically for those opt-out customers. So that would be an additional cost and challenge for us to incorporate into the selection process. But any customer who is a renter that does apply to the SCEF program can qualify. So there's still an opportunity for them to participate. It would just be challenging for us to incorporate that into the opt-out enrollment in the SCEF program.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then just a quick follow-up on that. Would the EDCs have any recommended adjustments to the current percentage allocations between different customer classes in SCEF?
I don't think we necessarily have any recommended adjustments right now. Obviously, there have been a lot of changes at the federal level in terms of which projects can qualify. Like some of the federal tax incentives are phasing out. There were some additional tax incentives for community solar projects that serve low-income customers that we recommended adjusting the SCEF allocation buckets to accommodate in earlier program rounds, and it's still a little bit up in the air about how long those federal tax incentives will continue for projects that qualify. But overall, even within just the nature of the selection process that we've implemented, we're still seeing a very high participation level of the percentage of customers that get selected for participation as being LIDR customers. And so I think, at least for Eversource, the last time I checked, which was yesterday, we're at almost 90% overall of our portfolio is serving low-income customers. So I think that the framework that we have right now has really been successful in directing the benefits of the SCEF program at that particular customer class.
Okay, thank you.
And
I believe, oh,
similar,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, similar to for UI, we already have anywhere between 50 to 70% of low-income customers and participating in LIDR. And again, the percentage that has been established is already 50% low-income customers, and the rest appears priority for enrollment of opt-out. So in our territory, we have a high percentage of the LIDR customer participating in our program as well.
Thank you. That is all of my questions on the EDC's presentation. So thank you again for presenting and answering my questions, and I will turn it back to Attorney Fryer.
Thank you. I believe now, Mr. Arpin from Pure Staff, that you have a couple questions.
Yes, thank you, Attorney Fryer. I would like to turn to slide 3, please. So my first question, so considering that the calculation for average annual billing reduction does not account for the cost customers incur to purchase or lease their solar systems, do the EDCs believe that solar customers would still experience net savings under alternative solar tariff designs where netted exports are compensated at less than the full retail rate? Why or why not?
Yes, we think they still may. And while it's not on this slide, in the company's prior written comments, as well as in the analysis attached to the second round of written comments, we also calculated a kind of weighted average value of energy output, reflecting that energy which is directly consumed on site would avoid billed usage at the full retail rate, while energy delivered to the grid would have a differentiated compensation rate. But we calculated what the kind of weighted average of those two streams would be, and got results that even in a more significant case where you're limiting credit for excess generation to supply rates, the weighted value could be in the kind of the 18 cent per kilowatt hour range, while a less differentiated rate would be much higher. And those values are consistent with PPA and lease rates that were reported for our RIS systems, particularly in the kind of early years of the program. So based on that, we would be optimistic that there could still be an opportunity for customers to realize net savings by installing on-site generation and participating in a alternative successor tariff.
Thank you for that response. Mr. Rice, now I'd like to turn to slide 4, please. So my first question, so to confirm, is the value of solar consumed on site for LiDAR customers enrolled in the netting tariff treated differently for UI versus Eversource? And I asked that because reading the interrogatory responses, it appeared that the value of solar used on site is reduced by the LiDAR discount for Eversource, but credited at the full retail rate for UI. So I wanted to confirm whether that understanding was correct, and whether the value of solar consumed on site for LiDAR customers is treated differently across both EDCs.
So I guess Ms. Miller and I can do our best to answer respectively here. and I'll try to not to speak for UI and especially the same for Eversource. I am confident in saying that from the customer experience, right, what the customer sees is going to be uniform across both companies. And that if they, reduce or offset usage, the kilowatt hours are going to be reduced, down to zero. And the way the discount is applied is the same. So the customer, like if there was kilowatt hour usage on this bill here on this slide, there would be, some small number of kilowatt hours times the full retail rate. And then the $9.62 that's discounted on the bottom line would be a larger number. And you'd have a larger, the total amount of the discount would be larger than $4.81. So I'm confident to see from what the customer sees is the same. I think there's a separate question of, well, how is it accounted for on the back end? The customer doesn't see that, but there still need to be accounting decisions made on where we're reflecting costs. And ultimately what do our respective billing systems communicate to our accounting systems. And that I don't know if we can represent that the companies are doing it identically. I mean, there are plenty of scenarios in which the accounting treatments by the companies can vary.
Thank you for
So
that
that's
response.
my explanation, but I think Ms. Miller should provide UIs as well.
Yeah, I think we would have to do some comparison, but I would agree that what the customer sees on a bill, it looks extremely similar, right? Because there was decision what items and what components should be included on a bill and reflect the program's incentives, whether it's credit or anything else. So as far as that, it's not really that the EDCs make the determination of the value, but again, the EDCs do not determine the price of the on-site generation and the cost or the price. It's basically the price that is what is exported, only for what is exported. And again, we will have to make look at each other's bills and do a comparison before we can elaborate more.
It might be appropriate. I don't know if there's a specific request that staff may have, but absent that, the EDCs probably could go back and look at our respective responses and see if there's an opportunity to supplement them in a way that would provide more clarity.
I would agree. Thank you.
I would appreciate that, Mr. Rice and Ms. Miller, if a supplement could be provided to explain any differences between the EDCs, particularly with respect to any non-participating ratepayer cost. So another question.
My apologies, Mr. Arvin. I just want to make sure that we have full questions, so we can answer it accordingly. If you don't mind to repeat the question and the aspects of what you're looking for.
Yes, I'm looking for whether the value of solar consumed on site for LiDAR customers enrolled in the netting tariff is treated differently for UI versus Eversource. And if so, how would that impact non-participating ratepayers? Considering Mr. Rice's explanation that from the customer perspective, it would be considered the same across both EDCs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question on this slide. If excess solar netting credits for LiDAR customers were valued at the full retail rate in a successor program, would allowing these customers to cash out their solar credits impact their eligibility for other low-income programs?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the EDCs know the answer to that, but I think if we'd be willing to take that as a record request or future information request and attempt to provide an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Does UI have anything that they would like to?
No, UI agrees with that approach as well. I think it will be good to actually take that back, and we can provide some additional feedback.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to slide 5, please. So my first question for this slide, I was wondering if the EDCs could please provide an update on the development of their flexible interconnection plans, which are required to be filed in docket number 250127 next year. My understanding is that it's currently being worked on in the interconnection working group. So I was wondering if the EDCs could please provide any update on the status of that.
I would not be able to provide any further update, but again, if there was a desire for one, we could, have the necessary subject matter experts at Eversource contribute to that, or perhaps the working group could provide an update.
And the same for UI. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to slide 6, please. So this is my final question, and I believe it's directed specifically to Eversource. So according to Eversource's response to CAE7, the NRES attrition rate is approximately 1%, while the SCEF attrition rate is significantly higher at about 21%. So I was wondering if Eversource could please explain the key drivers of this disparity in attrition rates between the two programs. Specifically, are there program design elements that may uniquely impact SCEF projects compared to NRES projects in a negative way?
So I think the SCEF attrition rate is higher because the program is older, and we've gotten to the point that projects reached the end of their kind of development window without reaching commercial operation and defaulted on their agreements. And we just haven't reached that point with as many NRES projects because it was launched more recently. And even if when we do, there are extension provisions that have been approved for NRES. So really what I would say is I don't think 1% is a representative long-term attrition rate of NRES. It's just the best number we can provide right now.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Rice, and that concludes my questions. So I'd like to thank both EDCs for their time and presentation today, and I turn it back to you, Attorney Fryer.
Thank you, Mr. Arpin. Right now, I'd like to open open the tech meeting up to any questions that stakeholders may have with respect to the EDC's presentation today. Mr. Moss?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joseph Moss from Verigy. I just had a quick question for the EDCs. I think it was on slide 5. Let's see. The EDCs mentioned that compensation rate adders for paired storage risk being artificial, inefficient, and negatively impacting the balance of cost among participants and non-participants. I was just wondering if the EDCs share this concern for the existing energy storage solutions program, which is generally aimed at behind the meter projects.
No, I wouldn't say Eversource does, because again, there's the energy storage solutions program. I'm not the expert on it, but my understanding is it includes performance-based compensation, which is tied to active demand reduction activity. So there's a performance-based component to the design and operation of the energy storage solutions program.
Thank you. And just to follow up quickly, and apologies if this is something that you already addressed, Mr. Rice, but would the EDCs have the same concern for a paired storage adder if it was also tied to similar performance requirements and, of course, properly valued to not be excessively high?
Yeah, I mean, to the maximum extent that any compensation can be tied to performance, that's obviously what we want to see. And I think what we'd recommend is achieving that through, these other programs. And instead of providing an extra, few cents per kilowatt hour for everything that a PV system produces, if it's paired with storage, we think we're going to achieve better outcomes if that project owner is able to enroll the PV system in a Successor renewable incentive program while simultaneously adding storage, and obtaining and realizing value for that storage through potentially several of these programs. Like maybe they can use it to reduce their interconnection costs while at the same time participating in wholesale markets with the benefit of a wholesale distribution access tariff. We just think we want to have basically storage programs that are focused on maximizing the cost and benefits balance of storage, and renewable energy programs that are focused on providing incentives for renewable energy output, and make sure people can participate in all of the above, not try to design one program that tries to achieve multiple goals, but ultimately doesn't do it as well as targeted programs.
Okay, understood. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Annis.
Thank you, Patrick. So Brian, might not be too surprised by my line of questions. I'm gonna just try to get something to the record for Pure to think about. I'm not sure I fully thought about it either, but do you know at this point the coincidence peak of a marginal solar project, NRES or RRES, and the system peak? Approximately. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to vary seasonally.
Well, system peak. So I'm talking about the summer peak.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's so that at least over my career, that value has changed. So like a decade ago, like anecdotally, I'd say the summer peak was kind of at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now it's probably more like 6 o'clock. In the afternoon / early evening. And I think your PV production is going to be more or less peak at midday.
Okay, yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at. And then my other question is, on those peak days, on the hottest days of the year, how much excess generation on a solar system on average is there? And this is an RRES, or both, but I'm thinking about RRES, if you know.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I also want to come back to just clarify, adding one additional item for consideration on kind of the previous question. I think it's also important to recognize that there's a system peak, like there's a regional system-wide New England peak. And that's kind of what I was referring to. But you can have localized peaks that are very different. So like a circuit that is predominantly serving residential load is going to have a different peak than the regional system.
Yes, that's a good question. And then, so thinking about setting rates and compensation, if we have the ability to think about that, that would be good. But I think that's a few years down the road.
Yeah.
Then I guess you had sent me on a side comment, like, can you approximate or give your understanding of the coincidence, how much on the peak day, how much excess generation there is? And then the question I had is like, and then if you incorporate the losses of storage, is there really, on the peak hottest days, is there going to be any use of storage to shift generation later in time? Or is there just not a lot of excess generation on that day? Does that make sense?
Yeah, understood. And again, in the workbook that we provided, it includes 87 60 kind of data for both load and representative generation. So we kind of wanted to provide that, so all participants if could kind of investigate on their own. But certainly and it's going to be very customer specific, like the relative kind of differences between PV output and load for a residential customer is going to be a lot different for a residential customer that has central air conditioning and one that doesn't, for example. So it's it's tough to kind of provide like a single definitive statement. But I don't know if I don't think I'm answering your question particularly completely.
You're doing it. All I'm trying to do is get the for discussion for thought. So I'm not. There is no right answer because what I'm trying to get at is my concern of setting rates and and how to encourage storage through the rates and solar plus storage, and what's the value of solar by itself without storage to the non-participants, and trying to what is the ideal rate mechanism to get the maximum benefit to non-participants as well as participants. And my concern is that if we don't do an output-based compensation, so you might not be encouraging the best production, the best use of storage for non-participants, if that makes sense. And again, you don't have to answer it. I just want that to be part of the conversation and the thought as we make recommendations to the legislature on successor programs. So
sure. Yeah.
So
I do have one
reaction.
thought, but I want to give UI an opportunity to weigh in if Katerina had thoughts as well.
No, thank you. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd say in closing is when Eversource has thought about this, at least, we're being somewhat responsive to interest in time of use rates, which Eversource is interested in too. Like, we fully expect that we will get to some future place where we have advanced metering, updated billing capabilities, and we have increased ability to support more complex time varying rate designs. And when you're at that point, you'll have the opportunity to do things that will be aligned with kind of maximizing the value and minimizing the cost of storage resources. And what we're suggesting as well is that in the meantime, there are things that we can do which are still an improvement from the status quo, even if they're not getting us to like tomorrow where we want to be long term. So I think we kind of start differentiating, like moving away from just full retail credit for all excess generation and no differentiation as a productive first step in a successor program that ultimately may be on a long-term pathway towards time of use rates when the EDCs are in a better position to offer those to customers.
I appreciate it. I'm going to let Mr. Malone move on. I just wanted to, I was thinking of the possibility of time of generation rates. So it's not a necessarily nettering, but when are you producing power and pushing power either to the house or to the system? Just for Pure to think about that as an alternative rate mechanism. But thank you very much, Brian, Katerina, for your time. And we're way over time, so I'll let Mr. Malone go.
Thank you.
Attorney Fryer, it's okay if I go?
Yes, Mr. Rowan, please proceed.
Thank you. So what I've heard, say from Eric and others, is that the focus correctly should be on maximizing the value of a successor program, right? Which is minimizing ratepayer costs. And right now, the EDCs don't know how to do that. Right? And I'm wondering what analysis the EDCs have done or proposed to do, recognizing that these are load reducers in ISO New England, right? And battery storage the EDCs couldn't value that now anyway, even if they could control it, because they would have to have the ability to monitor the system like Green Mountain Power does in Vermont with batteries in homes and use those to minimize the annual and the monthly peaks, thereby increasing the value in ISO New England. So before you talk about time of use rates, I mean, I don't even know how time of use rates can be determined unless the EDCs can determine why that adds value or doesn't add value. And the only way to do that is to have these fit to optimize their place in ISO New England. So what do the EDCs propose to actually do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing you're referring to is kind of like EDC control of resources and then like dispatching them at periods that align with peaks, which is a feature of the Energy Storage Solutions program, was a feature of connected solutions before that. So, I mean, the EDCs are doing that with behind the meter resources, and they're providing compensation to customers in exchange for the ability to dispatch those resources. We're not just doing it with storage. We've been doing it for years with thermostats and other controllable devices.
So how do the EDCs value that?
Like, so historically, the dispatch has been intended to align with regional system peaks.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But how does Eversource calculate the value in its system? I mean, I know how Green Mountain Power does it because it's easy, but how do the EDCs do that in Connecticut based on the way they currently treat these programs?
I mean, I don't manage ESS or connected solutions, so I'm not directly familiar with the reports that have been completed for that. But certainly with connected solutions, there were evaluations of that program. It was generally consistent with the evaluation techniques for conservation and load management programs. And I think we could kind of follow up with more information on that within the docket to show how kind of the performance of controlled kind of dispatch behind the meter resources has been evaluated.
All right. So getting on to the cost too, even for projects that don't have a battery, my understanding is Eversource right now, if there's a residential system that say just totally offsets what they otherwise would use, Eversource takes the full amount that they had to apply on somebody's bill as a credit and then charges ratepayers for that full amount in the RAM docket. Is that correct?
Yeah, if a customer has 0 sales and a credit is applied to their bill for excess generation, the amount of that credit is recognized as a cost and included within amounts that are recovered through non-contract qualifying facility purchases, which is a component of the RAM.
Right. So basically, in that case, Eversource gives no value to the energy that, say, has come into the system at various times and goes back out. All right. It's just a full charge, even though Eversource doesn't necessarily incur any cost for energy, right? I mean, if the balance is out at 0 for a month, you haven't incurred anything, but yet you're charging ratepayers for that for the full value of the net metering credit.
Well, it's all a cash accounting, so we're providing a cash credit on the bill, and that given that these resources are load reducers, there's no kind of cash balance that we can provide as a credit. In other states, where those resources are not registered are not load reducers and they're instead registered in the market, the full value of that settled energy is credited back to customers. And I mean, this kind of the distinction of being a load reducer versus being a settlement only generator, I think has been addressed in one form or another in most of the New England states, and different approaches have been taken. And I think it was uniformly recognized that when the decision is made for a resource to be a load reducer, then that value is effectively socialized amongst load serving entities. So you're just reducing because there's this energy that's being put back onto the grid. It's not being settled. It's not being, incorporated into, any load settlement or energy settlement. It's effectively, lost in line losses, and has the effect of reducing, the cost of wholesale energy for all participants.
Right. It does reduce.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just for a moment here. I'm going to pause this just for a moment, or not for a moment, for a few moments. We're going to proceed builder comments presentation with New Leaf Energy and Solar Energy Industries Association, just because there's a timing issue with respect to how long they can remain on the call. So we're going to jump over to that. And then we can circle back. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I just want to maximize the amount of people who can speak at today's tech meeting. So with that, Mr. Bumpin, if you could tee up that second presentation, and once that's done, we can proceed accordingly.
Thank you. All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. All right, my name's Jessica Robertson. I'm the Director of Policy and Business Development for New Leaf Energy. We're a New England-based company that develops solar and energy storage both at the distribution and transmission scale. And we do have projects in development in Connecticut. We've been talking a little bit about some of these topics already today, but I want to dive deeper into this concept of distribution connected storage and its ability to provide value as a load reducer. So if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So ISO New England is not an easy place to develop energy storage, standalone storage, because in other parts of the country, there's a lot of potential revenue from energy arbitrage, but that's not really the case in New England because we don't have a lot of energy price volatility. So capacity revenues tend to make up a bigger chunk of the revenue stack, but those are also not particularly substantial and undergoing a lot of changes right now with the capacity market. So based on all those factors, it's really difficult to develop energy storage in a financially viable way. And so in order to get storage deployed in New England, typically we have to depend upon procurements that lead to longer term contracts and or other types of incentives such as the Clean Peak program in Massachusetts. But there's this weird contrast, right, where we don't have a lot of energy price volatility, and so there isn't a lot of opportunity for storage to earn wholesale market revenues, but at the same time, energy prices are really high for ratepayers, both on the supply and the delivery side. So that means there is actually a lot of potential for storage to provide a lot of value, even if it's difficult for us to access a lot of revenue in the wholesale market. Can you move to the next slide? Thanks. So that's where this idea of load reducers comes in. So for distribution connected standalone front of meter battery storage, if they're operated at load reducers, there is a much better ability to actually sort of directly capture some of that value that we can provide. So in order for this to work, projects would have to be no more than 5 megawatts AC and would not participate in wholesale markets. And then there would be different dispatch behaviors that would sort of unlock those different value streams. So first is just the obvious one, which is the energy value that could be captured by cycling during the day, charging when energy prices are low and discharging when energy prices are higher. And then avoided capacity is a type of value that we can capture by dispatching during the annual ISO New England peak hour. And then avoided transmission is something we can capture by dispatching during the local transmission network monthly peak hours. So that last one is the most important one because avoided transmission costs don't have a corresponding wholesale market equivalent. And there's no way to, there's no way to earn that as a revenue stream in a wholesale market. But the amount of avoided costs that we can generate is more than double the other types of revenue that we could earn in the wholesale market. Next slide, please. So transmission costs, in addition to currently being, a very big chunk of costs, are also going up and are potentially going to start going up even faster. This is the latest ISO New England RNS rate forecast showing, substantial increases over just the next few years, not even, considering all of the transmission build out that is likely in the future due to electrification and incorporation of renewable generation, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. And then, looking further down the line, right? So we have, this was another ISO New England report looking at the 2050 transmission needs based on all the decarbonization goals and load growth that's associated with that. And what it found is that there's a huge differential between, how much we're going to need to collectively spend on transmission based on what our peak load is in 2050. So even if we have a huge increase in total electric demand, if we can keep the peak demand lower, then that can have an outsized impact on the cost of that future transmission build out. Specifically, the difference between 51 and 57 gigawatts of peak load in 2050 is a difference of 1.5 billion per gigawatt of load. So that's a huge benefit of being able to keep those peaks lower. Next slide, please. So this load reducer model with standalone distribution connected storage is already actually in place. And so there are a number of municipal utilities, mostly in Massachusetts, that are doing this already, and a bunch more that are in planning. And so these are both, in some cases, the municipal utility itself owns the battery storage facility. In other cases, including some that my company is working on, those would be third-party owned battery facilities on third-party owned land. And it's just a contractual relationship with the municipal utility. And in those cases, those projects are financed entirely on a shared savings model. So the batteries dispatched during the capacity and transmission peak hours, and then the utility compensates the battery based on a portion, usually a majority, but not the entire amount of those avoided costs. And these are just some examples of places where that's happening. Next slide, please. In addition, there are several states in New England that are looking at this model for potential implementation within investor-owned utility territories. So the Maine Governor's Energy Office put out a report recommending that a storage program be established and that there would be a carve out specifically for distribution connected storage that would be organized around the load reducer concept. That is now, the ball is in the Public Utility Commission's court, and there's been some back and forth in that docket, but not, they haven't fully established that program yet, but the load reducer concept is what they're working on implementing. Separately, in Rhode Island, the PUC is working on establishing retail rates for energy storage as well as an interconnection tariff. And they are working on developing a retail rate for standalone storage that's specifically looking at facilitating load reducer projects. And so this is being developed to have a bidirectional time of use retail rate. And so this would be the energy portion of those, those three value streams that I mentioned earlier. And then we're currently in discussion about sort of whether that avoided capacity and avoided transmission would be incorporated into the retail rate itself or will be dealt with separately. If it is incorporated into the retail rate, there's an example that we've looked at where it's there's this critical peak pricing component to the rate structure that would capture that avoided transmission and avoided capacity costs. And then finally, in Massachusetts, we have legislation that has been filed that would give the Department of Energy Resources the ability to establish a retail program there as well. This could build upon the Clean Peak program, which already exists. And the Clean Peak program is basically you generate a REC type product for dispatching during certain hours. But then the rest of the time you're expected to participate in wholesale markets. If we were to establish a retail program in Massachusetts, we would probably keep the Clean Peak portion of it. But then for distribution connected projects, instead of participating in the wholesale markets, the rest of the rest of the compensation will be structured through the retail rate. All right, next slide, please. So if Connecticut were to consider establishing a program like this, I think the best way to approach it would be a little bit more along how Rhode Island has done it by starting with the rates. And so starting with the bidirectional time of use retail rate specifically for distribution connected front of meter storage. This gives the storage operator a reason to dispatch on a more daily basis. And so the energy arbitrage value is valuable, but it's not really the primary source of revenue for the project. This is really more the retail rate portion of this is really making sure that the battery is providing benefits to the grid and ratepayers more often than just 13 hours a year. And so it doesn't need to be this retail rate structure doesn't need to be particularly lucrative. It just needs to sort of cover the costs from charging and round trip efficiency and any other demand charges or fixed costs. And then the second piece is where the real rubber hits the road, which is the transmission and capacity avoided costs. And this can be done in a very simple manner by just looking at the actual, doing it on a pay for performance basis, looking at the meter data from participating batteries, and then comparing that to the charges for RNS and ICAP that the utility is paying to ISO New England based on their respective share of load. And so you can just do this direct comparison of what capacity the battery was discharging at during the relevant hours, how much the utility's share of load would have been if not for that battery dispatching, and therefore how much was saved on the RNS and ICAP fees. And this, because those RNS and ICAP fees are very easily predictable, this is a revenue stream that would be these shared savings of compensating the batteries based on those avoided costs. That's a revenue stream that would be very easy for storage developers to secure financing based on that revenue stream, as opposed to, for example, the Clean Peak credits in Massachusetts, don't have any sort of history. They don't have a price floor. So it's just very difficult to get financing partners to have confidence in the value of those Clean Peak revenues. And so therefore it's very difficult to get projects built. However, the projects that we are working on and others have done with municipal utilities in Massachusetts, we can get financing for those projects because the RNS and ICAP fees are very predictable with a good level of confidence. And so even though that's not like we're not getting, a long-term contract at a fixed price, we can predict within a reasonable band of uncertainty how much we're going to earn from those avoided costs. So this is a pretty simple way that a program could be set up, where the main thing that would need to be established is just those retail rates. And then that would create an opportunity for the deployment of distribution connected storage. And the benefit of this would be that it is a shared savings model, right? So there's not an additional incentive most likely that is needed. And so that it would be a great way to get distribution connected storage deployed in Connecticut and contribute to savings directly for ratepayers. And that, I think, is it. So I'm happy to take questions and or kick directly to Valesa.
Peer staff, either Molly, Charles, or Christopher Arpin, do you have any questions at the moment?
Yeah, we do have questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can start, I guess, back at slide 2, please. So could you just discuss any projections of future energy price volatility in ISO New England? So to what extent is this expected to increase and potentially impact storage economics?
That's a great question. There's a lot changing right now. And so it's a little hard to predict. And I'm not personally an energy price forecaster. I do think that there is likely to be more volatility in the future as we move towards more intermittent resources. However, sort of what time scale that's going to happen on and how much energy price volatility will ultimately get is a big question mark. So I think it will be more, there will be more energy arbitrage value to be captured in the future, but it's hard to say exactly when.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And then a question on slide 6, please. So I'm just curious, what type of retail rate allows these load reducer batteries in the municipal utilities in Massachusetts to be financed on shared savings without any additional subsidy? Is that the same sort of bidirectional time of use rate you mentioned later?
We are working on these types of projects in a bunch of different utilities, municipal utilities, and they all have different rates. So typically when we are starting one of these projects and modeling the finances, we are actually just assuming that we break even on energy. So that there's whatever costs that we're paying for charging the battery, whatever, demand charges, et cetera, we might have, that just cancels out with whatever earnings we're getting from the energy piece alone. I will say caveat is, there, with tariffs and the new foreign entities of concern requirements that were part of the federal reconciliation bill, we are expecting energy storage equipment costs to go up. And so these dynamics will be a little bit in flux. And then also, the project costs are different based on land costs, interconnection costs, et cetera. And so in municipal utilities, the interconnection costs tend to be lower than they might be in other areas. So there's a bunch of different dynamics at play there, but for these particular projects, we've modeled them with a break even on energy, and then the revenue is all coming from the shared savings.
Thank you. And then I have a similar question on slide 7. So would all of these storage programs that are being developed in various states, would they all have similar program designs with the same sort of bidirectional time of use rate and shared savings? Or, I mean, to the extent that that's been finalized in these proceedings?
Yeah, so we haven't gotten to the rates question in Maine yet. That proceeding is going rather slowly. In Rhode Island, we started with the rates piece, and we've discussed it in concept, but we have not gotten to the point in the proceeding yet where Rhode Island Energy has actually assigned dollar values to anything. We've just been talking about it more conceptually. And then in Massachusetts, we're sort of even further behind. We're just working on the enabling legislation.
Okay, thank you. Can we turn to slide 8, please? So would only standalone front of the meter storage be eligible under this load reducer model, or could it potentially also be applied to paired solar and storage?
Yeah, so this is sort of the concept of the Connected Solutions program, where where you're compensated based on dispatching during particular peak hours. I think the difference is really has to do with program administration, and so the Connected Solutions program is works under the assumption that the battery owners are not necessarily actively dispatching and paying attention to energy markets. Whereas for load reducers, the onus of hitting those peak hours can be placed on the battery operator, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a called event by the utilities. Because you can, as a battery operator, you can, pretty well predict when those peaks are going to happen and take on that risk.
Okay, just to make sure I understand. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you can finish your answer.
Sure. Okay, I was just gonna say in terms of like solar plus storage front of meter projects operating in this manner, that could also potentially work. The economics are totally different though once you add solar.
In what way would they be different?
Well, just, the equipment cost of the solar plus the storage is different, but then you're also earning revenue from the generation. So there's just a lot of, it would just be a completely different business model that this might, operating those projects in a load reducer manner might still be beneficial, but that's, just a totally different economic structure. That is not what I was covering here.
Okay. So yeah, this program design would specifically be for standalone storage with no solar.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just a question on the shared savings approach. So if the utility would compensate the storage facility for the majority of avoided costs, how much of that benefit would be realized by ratepayers?
So that is sort of back to my previous answer about sort of it depends on the retail rate, it depends on some of these other costs, like interconnection and equipment costs and how those might be changing based on the federal investment tax credit rules and tariffs and stuff. So I don't want to put a number out there because of all those different dynamics, but that's something that, in the course of developing a retail rate, those aspects could be modeled, and that would depend. It would also depend on if the retail rate ends up in a break even for energy or if there's earnings from energy as well. So the different projects that have done this with municipal utilities in Massachusetts have a range of different shared savings breakdowns based on whether the utility owns the project or owns the land and other factors.
Okay, so is that sharing of savings negotiated sort of on a project by project basis, or is that something that's standardized?
In the projects that have happened to date with municipal utilities, that is negotiated on a project by project basis. For a program that's established for, a larger territory, like a utility territory in a state rather than just a municipal utility, I think that could be established in the establishment of the program, that there is a certain shared savings level, and then the projects that can make that shared savings level work would be able to partake in the program and or otherwise not, based on all those equipment, interconnection, land costs, all of those other factors. So I don't think it's necessary. It could be done as a competitive procurement, but given that this is a shared savings, not a cost to ratepayers, I don't think it's necessarily the highest priority to have price competition. It could just be established that there's a particular shared savings rate, and as long as that works for some projects, that would still be net beneficial to ratepayers.
Okay. Would there be any measures that New Leaf would recommend to ensure that ratepayers capture some of the benefit?
I mean, for this one, it's really pretty easy because it's a direct savings. There isn't any, you don't actually have to model or do any complicated accounting. The battery dispatching during those peak hours just directly causes the savings, and then you're just taking a portion of that savings and paying it back to the battery operator. So it's pretty much guaranteed to generate ratepayer savings.
Okay. And over what time period can those RNS and ICAP fees be modeled with high confidence? Would that be something that can be projected throughout the whole battery lifetime?
Yeah, so those are standard, like all of the various services that do modeling for, for energy price forecasts and all of those things, have those types of, those are things that are included in those standard forecasts that go out, different numbers of years into the future with different levels of confidence. So,
Okay.
but for, a typical lithium-ion battery project might have sort of a useful life of, say, 20 years. And so that would be sort of the typical range where we would forecast those.
Okay, thank you. So would a time of use retail rate be sort of a sufficient mechanism to ensure that the storage dispatches during those monthly and annual peaks, or would any additional dispatch signal be required?
So the time of use retail rate is for the daily cycling. And then the shared savings opportunity is what is incentivizing the dispatch during the monthly and annual peak hours. So there would need to be some sort of contractual relationship saying if you dispatch during the monthly transmission peaks and annual capacity peaks, we will pay you X% of the shared savings.
Okay, thank you. And then would this load reducer construct be entirely state jurisdictional, or would it require any sort of FERC approval?
So this model would not require any FERC approval. It's been implemented, the ones in municipal utilities have not required any FERC approval. But
Okay.
I'm not a FERC lawyer, so with that disclaimer.
And then would legislation be required in order to enable this in Connecticut?
I am not sure. So I believe, and again, I'm not a lawyer, and not an expert in Connecticut law, specifically, but I believe that that PURA could direct the utilities to establish a retail rate for energy storage. And then I'm not sure about in terms of, establishing that compensation based on the avoided costs. I'm not sure if that would require additional legislative authority, but I believe that PURA has the authority to do that based on the existing legislative authority.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess a little bit similar to the FERC question, could you just compare and contrast this proposed approach with a time of use rate with the wholesale distribution access tariff that was previously developed, in terms of what types of storage can use it and what value streams it enables storage to capture?
Yeah, so the wholesale distribution access tariff was developed with wholesale participating storage in mind. And so that would be any storage connected to the distribution system that's participating in the wholesale markets would use that wholesale distribution access tariff as the way that they're paying for their charging energy. So they're getting paid for discharging by the wholesale market, but they pay for the charging energy based on that WDAT. For the load reducer storage is not, it's a mutually exclusive. You're either a load reducer or a wholesale market participant. So if you are choosing to be a load reducer, then you are not using the wholesale access tariff because you're not participating in the wholesale market. So that's why a separate retail rate is needed for the charging energy.
Thank you. And then just one final question on this. So since you mentioned that this would be specifically targeting standalone storage without any solar connected, do you see any way this could potentially align with a non-residential solar successor program and ways to ensure that paired storage is encouraged in a way that provides ratepayer benefits?
Yeah, I think it would absolutely be useful to, in the course of developing a successor program for solar, to think about how to encourage paired storage and then how to compensate those projects if they dispatch during these peak hours. So there absolutely still is a benefit for discharging energy during those peak hours, and that can be done, in different ways based on how that solar program is set up. But having, whether or not it's sort of a time of use rate for that solar generation, like for all hours of the day, or just, specific extra incentive for these critical peak hours.
Okay, and just in case I missed it, is that something that a load reducer could also do, or they're sort of separate participation pathways?
Yeah, again, so in order to be a load reducer, you have to be under 5 megawatts AC and you have to not participate in the wholesale markets. So that would have to be the case for a paired project as well.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that's all of my questions on this presentation. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Attorney Fryer.
Mr. Arpin, do you have any questions with respect to this presentation?
I do. Thank you, Attorney Fryer, and like to thank New Leaf for their presentation today. I would like to turn to slide 6, please. So my first question, I'm curious about what lessons have been learned from existing load reducer storage projects to date, particularly regarding siting, interconnection, and community engagement.
Yeah, so we have gone through, a lot of siting reform in certain other states, in particular Massachusetts. And battery storage tends to be a little bit easier to site than other technologies like solar because it doesn't require as much land. Um, and generally, it's you know it's more beneficial to be sited in places that have more load and are sort of a denser part of the distribution system. So unlike solar, where you're looking for a lot of land and therefore you're more likely to be in a rural area for energy storage, you can provide more benefit to the system if you're in a slightly denser area. However, we have seen some pitfalls in getting too specific about where energy storage should be located. So the Clean Peak program in Massachusetts has a distribution circuit multiplier, which is aiming to incentivize projects to site on specific circuits that are overloaded, with the idea that adding energy storage in those locations can help resolve those existing constraints on the distribution system. However, what we found is that it's really difficult to interconnect in those locations. And even if we are interconnecting on those circuits, and we've managed to convince the utility to let us do that, just because there's storage added on that circuit, that doesn't necessarily mean we're actually helping the constraint. And it has gotten complicated, and it's perhaps, better to think about those types of benefits that storage can provide more at the substation level. And that, if you're locating energy storage on a heavily loaded substation, the energy storage can help serve the load on any of the circuits that are using that substation, even if it's not located on a specific one. So generally, our recommendation is, to be looking for denser areas of the grid to site energy storage. And it can be beneficial for specific constraints that already exist, but to not try and get too detailed about exactly where to site those projects.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. So another question is kind of similar to that. If any best practices or common pitfalls been identified that could improve project success rates in a future load reducer storage program?
Yeah, I mean, so I sort of touched on some of those already, which is that, that trying to encourage projects to site on distressed circuits means that it's difficult to interconnect those projects. So so looking for places where we can be helpful without, you know, cause like where looking for places where there is interconnection capacity for us to connect, or else where our interconnection upgrades that we're triggering can help resolve some constraints, but not where we're, limited by the issue we're trying to fix.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to slide 8, please. So my first question for this slide. So to date, the present proceeding has been primarily focused on studying successor programs to the existing RRES, NRES, and SCEF programs. So my question is, how can standalone FTM storage be best incorporated into this study to ensure a comprehensive approach to future successor programs?
Yeah, I think one of the questions in the last round of stakeholder questions was asking to sort of compare to some things that have worked well or not worked so well in other states. And so that was why we wanted to throw this idea in the mix, because it is working, for these municipal utilities in Massachusetts and being considered by other states as well. And also to the previous comments, I think this idea of the benefits that load reducers can provide could be incorporated into a solar program as well. But I think the simplest way to do it is as a standalone storage program.
Thank you for that response. So another question staying on this slide. So Deep recently conducted an FTM storage procurement, I believe, earlier this year. Could New Leaf please comment on whether its proposed program structure overlaps with Deep's efforts at all? And if so, how the proposal could be modified to complement rather than duplicate potential future Deep procurements?
Yeah, so Deep's procurement was, in general, competitive procurements are typically, in my opinion, more appropriate for larger projects because there are a lot of there's more benefit to be gained by having that price competition when you're procuring more of a thing. And the administrative costs for both the project owners and the program administrators are pretty significant for running a procurement and for doing all the contracting, associated with that. And so when you're looking at a larger number of smaller projects, those administrative costs are proportionally much higher than if you're only procuring one or two really big projects. So in general, and we say this in many different states, for distribution scale projects, procurements are a pretty cumbersome way to operate a program. And then, also, as I mentioned earlier, specifically for the load reducer concept, given that it is a net savings, there isn't the same type of pressure to have that price competition. But specifically for Deep's procurement last year, the contract structure that they proposed was very complicated and was based on wholesale market participation. And so that, the first step there is that a load reducer is not a wholesale market participant. So you wouldn't want to be having a contract structure that's built upon the base of wholesale market participation. And, and as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, there's a lot more potential value on the table if you're operating as a load reducer because those avoided transmission costs are so substantial and going up significantly over time. So, the procurement that Deep is doing and potentially doing future rounds of, I would say is a more appropriate venue to procure large scale wholesale market participating storage. But for distribution connected storage, the load reducer model is a much better way to capture ratepayer value. And that is, that structure is incompatible with the way that Deep ran their last procurement. So those two things could definitely coexist in parallel and serve different project types.
Thank you for that response, Ms. Robertson. So another question, staying on this slide, I'm curious about what telemetry or metering requirements would be necessary to measure peak reduction contributions accurately, and what the technical barriers to implementing those requirements are.
So I'm not a technical expert on meter technology, but my understanding is that like a standard revenue meter would be sufficient. And I can also get back to you if we need more detailed technical responses on that. But yeah, you're basically just measuring how much the battery is exporting to the grid during that particular hour.
Okay, I appreciate that response. So another question, I'm curious about approximately how much of a standalone FTM storage project's cost could be reasonably recovered through energy arbitrage under a bidirectional time of use rate, and how much additional ratepayer funded incentive support would likely be needed to make such projects economically viable. You may have touched on this a little with Ms. Charles's questions, but just to follow up on that.
Yeah, so if we were only doing this through a rate and there were no opportunity for sharing avoided transmission and capacity costs, then I think we would need a significant amount of revenue from the rate itself. But the idea is that if we can access the avoided transmission and capacity costs, those value streams, in particular the transmission, is so substantial that does cover the vast majority of the cost of building the storage facility.
Thank you for that response, Ms. Robertson. Now, the rest of my questions are to the EDCs, specifically recognizing that the EDCs would likely be involved if Pura did decide to pursue a load reducing program construct. So opening it up to the EDCs now, I'm curious if the EDCs could please provide their initial thoughts on the load reducer program structure proposed by New Leaf, including any potential benefits, drawbacks, or challenges that the EDCs would foresee with this structure.
I guess I'll go first. I appreciate the proposal and the interest in finding solutions to economically support storage resources. And appreciate modeling it off of some of the features of connected solutions, energy storage solutions, and other programs. One item I would express caution on is the focus on RNS values and capacity and FCM values for that matter. And for a couple reasons. One kind of
Do they let
disadvantage
you
here.
stay in here? Because this is okay.
Can folks hear me?
I think somebody just
Okay.
went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this structure puts a lot of weight on a single hour each month. It effectively is providing a price signal to a resource owner that says discharge as much energy as you possibly can in 1 hour. Which I recognize why, and that corresponds to a value that's used for allocating regional transmission costs. But from an operations perspective, it's not actually the best way to optimize a resource. I think what the EDCs have recently been doing is actually trying to do the opposite. So like flexible interconnection is a good example. There, we're trying to create a price signal that encourages a system owner to moderate what they're putting back out onto the grid during a single hour and use storage to do that. So the price signals involved here are very much opposed. The other thing that I think we'd highlight is that RNS is not actual transmission costs. It's just the basis by which regional transmission costs are allocated amongst all transmission owners. So if you reduce your output during the single hour on which those charges are allocated, you haven't necessarily reduced transmission costs. You've just allocated them to other transmission owners, which works on a kind of marginal basis in isolation. But if that was a uniform strategy that was employed across the region, then ultimately it would be kind of a race to nowhere because everybody would be doing the same thing and nobody would be realizing any value for it. So I guess those are kind of some of the areas in which we'd encourage maybe stakeholders to work to find kind of a different program design. But nonetheless, I hope as we communicated through our slides, very much supportive of strategies that ultimately support the deployment of all storage resources, including front of meter storage.
I appreciate that response. Mr. Rice, now I'd like to ask if UI has anything that they would like to add to that question as well.
No, thank you. I think we will have to review again with the internal group. I'm not an expert of energy storage, to be honest, because our team does not administer energy storage, but I would agree what Mr. Rice actually stated earlier.
Okay, thank you. And I see Ms. Robertson, your hand is up, so I don't like to give you a chance to briefly respond if you have anything that you would like to add or clarify.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that on the first point for Mr. Rice about sort of incentivizing dispatch during one single hour, that was the whole point of saying that we should have this bidirectional time of use rate that's encouraging us to be charging and discharging for a lot of the day on most days. And it's just that There are specific hours when we're going to make sure we're discharging, but that's the only time that we're discharging. So that's why having both of those components is important. And then to the second point about sort of the race to the bottom, I think that's also why it's relevant, that other states are already doing this or looking at this, and it isn't a race to the bottom if everyone's doing it. And also on my earlier slide about the increase in transmission costs, and in particular the astronomical increase in transmission costs if we don't keep peak load down. So I totally agree that RNS fees are not the same thing as transmission costs, but I definitely think that we all collectively, and I as a ratepayer in New England also personally hope that we can do everything we can to keep peak load down, and therefore keep the growth of those costs as low as possible. And so while yes, this is each incremental load reducer that comes online is just shuffling around the costs, if all of the states implement a load reducer program, then collectively we will all pay a lot less for future transmission.
Thank you for those responses. So another question to the EDCs specifically on this. I was wondering if the EDCs could comment specifically on the feasibility of implementing a bidirectional time of use rate for energy storage specifically. And I'm also curious whether standalone energy storage is currently eligible to participate in any existing time of use rates in Connecticut. I do recognize that you're not necessarily a meter or rate expert, but if you could provide any feedback on that, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, not the meter rate expert, but I mean, so my understanding is we're probably talking about larger scale resources that would require interval metering anyway. And that's often at least one kind of barrier to offering a time of use rates. So I don't think that would be the case here. So then it just kind of comes down to like the administration considerations. Is it a rate structure that, a billing system can be automated to support, or are we going to be relying on kind of manual calculations? But, and I think, again, I'm not the rate expert, but, obviously, historically time of use rates have been much more common for kind of commercial rate structures for larger loads and larger resources.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Ms. Miller, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, again, I'm not an expert on rates, so I don't want to mislead the authority or the participants in my answer.
Okay, thank you. And those are all of my questions for this presentation. So again, I would like to thank Ms. Robertson for her presentation and time today. And I turn it back to you, Attorney Fryer.
Thank you, Mr. Arpin. Mr. Merlin, I see that your hand is raised. Just before we circle back to questions about the EDC presentation, I'd like to open it up to questions now with this particular presentation. And Mr. Merlin, if you have a question about this presentation,
yeah, I do.
Please go ahead.
So I agree that with the point that was made that if every state did the load reducer thing to the optimal method, that basically it equalizes things. But I think one good point is if other states do it and Connecticut doesn't, then everybody's going to be dumping the costs on Connecticut. But I think it's not just a race to the bottom. I think there is savings, even if every state did it. What that would do in ISO New England is lower the peaks, which will then send a price signal to ISO New England that they don't need to build more transmission, which will then save ratepayers money. And all the transmission owners in ISO New England are trying to focus their business more on building big transmission because they make more money, FERC approves it, and bypasses the states. So I think there's not only the shifting, but it ultimately will keep the transmission costs lower because it won't send the price signals that new transmission needs to be built.
Thank you, Mr. Merlin. Is there any other questions with respect to this presentation? Seeing none, we can, Mr. Malone, I don't know if you have any further questions with respect to the EDC presentation from earlier.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, and I'll be short, is that we've heard from Eversource and UI a lot about performance-based value. Seems to me that the EDCs have to themselves give performance-based value, and that means optimizing these assets in ISO New England, not doing what they've been doing for the last 20 years, because that just raises rates, doesn't get the value. And so that's what they need to do on any successor program, to stop the wasting of ratepayer money, overbilling ratepayers for load reducers and not reflecting any value. That's all I have to say today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I appreciate all the presenters, all the stakeholder questions, and the dialogue that we had today. I believe that concludes the questions and comment period. I just calling out now if there's any public comment from anyone participating today. And seeing none, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda today. I just would like to highlight that the next item on our docket, on our schedule. Oh, I see that there's a hand up. I did not see that. My apologies. Mr. Moss?
Yes, sorry to belabor this. Just wanted to step back to a comment that was made earlier by EDCs regarding the potential storage adder.
Sure, go ahead.
I believe it was the EDCs mentioned that they desired or thought it would be beneficial to generally keep like distributed generation and distributed storage projects or programs separate. And I just wanted to follow up and ask EDCs if they're still around, if there was any particular issue with considering distributed generation and distributed storage as a unified or like a paired system, assuming that performance requirements and overall compensation rates were the same as they would otherwise be in two independent programs running in parallel, if that makes any sense.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but maybe I'll just try to answer by reiterating kind of our recommendation. So like an example, in a scenario like flexible interconnection, that's a kind of case in which we are saying that the resources should be looked at holistically, that kind of the interconnection requirements should be based on kind of the managed output of both resources. And again, I want to make clear, I think the EDCs, uniformly are supportive of promoting the deployment of energy storage resources. I think all we're recommending is that not be done by through an adder mechanism, through saying we're going to pay more money to renewable resources participating in an incentive program if they have storage, just because we think that's kind of an inefficient way of providing a price signal, where there are several other ways in which we can provide a targeted price signal for the performance of the storage resource.
Okay, I think I understand. I'm just imagining like a behind the meter storage system participating in the energy storage solutions program paired with a behind the meter solar array. And like the energy storage solutions program would provide a certain amount of total dollars to storage for the performance of that storage asset. And I'm just wondering if there is like a particular issue with having that compensation for the storage asset be in the form of an adder if the total dollars to the storage asset are the same that they would have been in the ESS program, and the performance requirements are the same.
Yeah, I guess what confuses me by the question is the determinants for compensation for a renewable program are can typically be based on the performance and the output of the generation unit. So, dollars per megawatt hour, cents per kilowatt hour. And the performance values that are the basis of compensation within like energy storage solutions are going to be different. It's going to be, based on the discharge capacity of the stored resource. So like, I guess you could do the math to like say, well, try and take like a pool of dollars and, reframe that as a dollar per kilowatt hour value. I guess my question is what's gained by doing that?
Yeah, that's about what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I think the gain might be potentially providing a similar sort of incentive for a front of the meter paired storage project, since energy storage solutions is generally targeted behind the meter. But I just wasn't sure if there was some categorical reason that the EDCs might be opposed to that.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately our recommendation would be the compensation would be based on the performance of the storage resource. So like any compensation that was expressed in dollars per kilowatt hours wouldn't really be meaningful. We want to pay people for performance values based on the storage.
Okay, I think I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating. As I was saying earlier, it looks like the next event on the schedule are the issuance of a third set of interrogatories, those being due on October 29th. And I'd like again to state how we appreciate everyone's participation in today's meeting and helping us develop a record to eventually file a report with the General Assembly. Your cooperation is integral to that, and we thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.